I'm a 27-year-old man, and in my family, marriage isn't a choice, it's an obligation. I come from a deeply traditional background where arranged marriages aren't just common, they're expected. No dating, no falling in love, no finding the right person on your own. The elders decide who you'll marry, and you accept it without question. That's how it's always been. My family isn't just traditional, they're respected. My father is one of the most well-known figures in our community, and my mother is the kind of woman who believes family honor is worth more than personal happiness. My relatives hold on to old customs like their lives depend on it. Any deviation, any act of rebellion, is seen as a betrayal. I never thought it would come down to this. I always assumed I had time before they pushed marriage on me, that maybe they would let me have some say in who I ended up with. But a few weeks ago, everything changed. It was a normal evening. I had just come home from work when my parents sat me down in the living room. The atmosphere felt off. My father was serious. My mother was overly cheerful, which meant only one thing. They had made a decision for me, and I was supposed to accept it without question. My father, always direct, told me they had found the perfect match for me. A woman from a good family, someone they had known for years. They spoke about her as if she was a prized possession, listing her qualities like she was an item on a resume. She was well-mannered, educated, and came from a respected lineage. That last part was the most important thing to them. I remember feeling like the floor had been pulled from under me. I asked them if they expected me to just marry a stranger, someone I'd never met. My mother's expression shifted immediately. The fake joy disappeared, replaced by disappointment. My father's face hardened. My refusal wasn't just an inconvenience to them, it was an insult. My mother went straight into emotional blackmail. She cried, saying she had prayed for this moment and that my father had spent years making sure I had a good future. My father reminded me that it was my duty to continue the family's legacy. They acted like I was lucky, like they were doing me a favor. I wasn't being asked to marry her, I was expected to. It didn't stop at them. Within hours, relatives started calling me, acting as if the wedding was already happening. They talked about venues, dates, and family blessings. No one asked if I wanted this. They assumed I would do what I was told. At that point, I hadn't even met the woman they wanted me to marry, but they didn't care. To them, love wasn't important, only reputation and family status. The next day, they arranged a meeting between me and the woman Aisha. I walked into it expecting her to be fully on board. Someone raised with the same beliefs, but when I saw her, I could tell right away. She didn't want this either. Aisha was polite, quiet, and reserved, but she wasn't excited. When our family stepped away, we finally got a chance to talk privately. That's when she told me the truth. She didn't want this marriage any more than I did, but her parents had given her an ultimatum: marry or be disowned. She was scared, but she felt trapped. That conversation changed everything for me. It wasn't just about me anymore. It was about the fact that both of us were being treated like objects, like pieces in some twisted chess game where only our parents got to make the moves. I made up my mind right then. I wasn't going to go through with it. That night, I told my parents I wouldn't marry Aisha. At first, they didn't react. The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating. Then my father exploded. He accused me of shaming the family, of throwing away everything they had built. My mother cried, saying I was breaking her heart. My aunts and uncles got involved, berating me, telling me I was being selfish. The insults, the anger, the guilt tripping. It was relentless. They said I was humiliating them in front of the entire community. Then came the final blow. My father stood up, looked me dead in the eye, and gave me a choice: marry Aisha, or leave this family forever. I was supposed to crumble. I was supposed to beg for forgiveness, but I didn't. I knew what I was about to lose: my home, my inheritance, my place in the family. My siblings, who had stayed quiet through it all, looked at me with a mix of pity and fear. They knew what would happen if I refused. I left the room without another word. Later that night, I called my best friend and told him everything. He didn't hesitate. He told me I was doing the right thing, that a forced marriage wasn't love. That family shouldn't be about control. And so I made my decision. The next morning, I told my parents I wouldn't change my mind. Whatever they decided to do, I would accept it. Their answer was swift. I was no longer their son. The silence in the house was suffocating. After I refused the marriage, my father didn't speak to me again. He left the room that night, his face blank, his steps heavy. My mother wasn't as quiet. She sobbed loudly, making sure the entire household heard her grief. She repeated the same words over and over: I was destroying our family, disrespecting my parents, shaming my ancestors. By morning, the news had spread. My phone started buzzing nonstop: calls, messages, voicemails, all from relatives. Some started with fake concern, asking if I had lost my mind. Others went straight to guilt tripping. I was ungrateful, selfish, blinded by Western ideas. My parents had given me everything, and this was how I repaid them. A few messages stood out more than the others. One from an uncle, warning me that no one in the family would stand by me if I continued down this path. Another from a cousin, saying the elders were discussing how to handle the situation. Whatever that meant, it wasn't good. The house itself felt different. My siblings, usually caught between obedience and personal loyalty, avoided me completely. They didn't look at me, didn't speak to me, didn't even acknowledge me. It wasn't hard to figure out why. My father had forbidden them from having anything to do with me. By the afternoon, my bank app wouldn't open. An error message. Then an email from my father's lawyer. Access revoked. I had always known my father controlled the business accounts, but I had assumed my personal savings were safe. A second call to the bank confirmed otherwise. He had already placed a hold on the joint account he had opened for me years ago. Fortunately, I had already transferred most of my personal savings to a private account when tensions started rising. The final blow came when my mother walked into my room, tear-streaked and quiet. No more dramatic wailing. Just a single sentence. Pack your things. You're no longer welcome here. The moment she left, I opened my messages and texted my best friend. Within minutes, he responded. His place was open to me. I stuffed whatever I could into my bags, not even bothering to fold anything. My mind was running on autopilot. By the time I made it to the front door, I realized my father had been sitting in the living room the whole time. He never turned to look at me. Outside, the air was colder than usual. It was unsettling how normal everything looked when my life had just imploded. I crashed on my best friend's couch that night. The relief of being out of the house was mixed with something heavier. I had nothing left. No family, no financial security, no home. Just a duffel bag, and a handful of missed calls I had no intention of returning. The next morning, Aisha sent me a message. She had heard what happened. She said she envied my courage but that she couldn't afford to do what I had done. Her parents had already found another groom. The wedding had been fast-tracked. Just like that, it confirmed what I had known all along. None of this had ever been about us. It was about control, tradition, reputation. The people making the decisions didn't care how we felt. They just wanted things to look right. A few hours later, the public shaming began. Family members started posting vague social media updates, long, dramatic messages about loyalty, obedience, and dishonoring parents. Some were clearly about me. Others felt like general warnings to anyone who might think of stepping out of line. I ignored them at first, but then a message popped up from an old childhood friend. Bro, your family is making you sound like the worst person alive right now. I didn't need to check. I already knew what they were saying. But the pressure wasn't just coming from family. Even at work, there was tension. My boss, someone from the same cultural background, suddenly became more distant. During a meeting, he casually asked if I had thought things through and if I was sure this was what I wanted. I wasn't stupid. I knew what he meant. My family's influence ran deep. It was a warning. That evening, my father called. It was the first time since I had walked out of the house. The conversation was short. If I apologized and agreed to the marriage, all would be forgiven. I told him no. There was a pause, then a quiet. Then you are no longer my son. The call ended, and that was it. No more family, no more home, no more safety net. The next week at work, my boss subtly hinted at loyalty and family obligations, making it clear he had heard about my situation. I realized then that my father's influence stretched into my career as well. Within days, my projects were reassigned and my role became less secure. For the first time in my life, I was completely on my own. The exile became real fast. The first sign was the locked bank account. I had some money saved, but most of it was in an account my father had opened for me years ago. When I tried to log in, the app showed an error. A call to the bank confirmed it. Account frozen by the primary holder. No warning, no discussion. Just gone. Then my younger brother stopped responding to messages. He had been the only one who hadn't openly turned against me. But now, nothing. Calls went to voicemail. Texts were left on read. I already knew what had happened. My parents had gotten to him. Months later, when I finally heard from him again, he admitted that he had started doubting everything when he saw our father arrange another marriage for him, without even asking if he was ready. He realized then that obedience didn't earn him love, just more control. Maybe they had threatened him. Maybe they had guilt-tripped him. Either way, I had lost him too. The silence at work was the next thing I noticed. It started small. Conversations that stopped when I walked into the break room, coworkers glancing at me, then looking away. The gossip spread quickly. In my community, defying your parents wasn't just a personal problem, it was public. Word got around that I had disrespected my family, that I had abandoned them. A week later, my boss called me into his office. He kept his voice neutral, but the message was clear. He had heard about my situation, and he hoped I would reconsider my actions for the sake of my family. It wasn't a direct threat, but I knew what he meant. My family's influence was stronger than I had realized. If I stayed, things would only get worse. I needed a way out. I started sending out job applications, places far from home, outside the reach of my family's network. Most were dead ends, but then an unexpected message came through. An old mentor had seen the social media drama and reached out. He had a job opening out of state. Better pay, better opportunities. It wasn't just an offer, it was an escape. Leaving wasn't easy. Even after everything, walking away from the only life I had ever known felt impossible. But staying meant being trapped under the weight of my family's expectations forever. I packed my bags again, this time for real. A few days later, I was on a flight to my new life. But the past wasn't done with me yet. My family made sure of that. Relatives started calling distant family friends, telling them I was dead to them, that I had shamed the family name beyond repair. Some old friends messaged me, hesitant, as if checking if I was still the same person. Others stopped reaching out entirely. Then, a wedding photo popped up on my feed. Aisha, dressed in bridal red, standing next to a man she had probably spoken to twice before the wedding. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. The comments were filled with congratulations, blessings, and endless talk about how beautiful she looked. Not a single mention of what she had wanted. For the first time since leaving, I felt doubt creeping in. Maybe I should have stayed. Maybe I should have found some middle ground. Maybe I had been too harsh. My best friend snapped me out of it. He reminded me of what staying would have meant. A marriage I didn't want. A life I didn't choose. A future spent trying to meet expectations that would never be enough. I pushed forward. Therapy helped. I hadn't realized just how much guilt I was carrying, how much my parents had controlled every part of my life. Unpacking years of conditioning wasn't easy, but for the first time, I wasn't just surviving. I was healing. Then the job offer came through. Official contract. High salary. A completely new industry. For the first time, I had something that was mine, something no one could take away. And that's when my father called. No apology, no acknowledgement of what had happened. Just a calculated tone, like a businessman reaching out to a former client. I heard you're doing well. Let's talk. It wasn't about reconciliation. It was about control. He had lost his grip on me, and now he wanted to see if I could be lured back. He didn't care about me. He cared that I was useful again, that I had value. I let him talk, let him say his piece. Then I gave him my answer. Unless you can accept me as I am, without conditions, there's nothing left to say. Then I hung up. For the first time in my life, I felt truly free. The betrayal hit harder than expected. Scrolling through social media one night, I came across a post from my younger brother. It wasn't subtle. A long paragraph about loyalty, duty, and selfishness. The part that stood out, some people abandon their family for their own ego, pretending it's about freedom when it's just pride. There was no name, but it didn't need one. The comment section made it clear. Relatives chimed in with agreement, calling me a disgrace, an embarrassment, someone who had lost his way. Others pitied my parents, talking about how heartbreaking it must be for them to have a son who threw them away. The smear campaign wasn't just on social media. Rumors started spreading. According to family gossip, I was miserable, struggling to survive without them. Some said I had begged to come back but was too ashamed to admit it. Others claimed I was already planning to return, that this little rebellion was temporary. None of it was true. Then came the health scare. A cousin, one of the few who hadn't openly turned against me, reached out. My mother was sick. Stress, depression, the weight of my betrayal had taken its toll. She wasn't eating. She was barely speaking. For a second, I almost believed it. Then another message arrived from someone else in the family, this time with a much different story. My mother wasn't bedridden or weak. She was still going to social gatherings, still hosting guests. If she was sick, it wasn't the way they made it sound. The whole thing felt like a setup, but it still stayed in my mind. That same week, another unexpected message came through. This time from Aisha. She had seen my brother's post. She wasn't surprised. Her own family had done the same to her cousin years ago, when she had shamed them by refusing an arranged marriage. Then she admitted something I already suspected. Her marriage was exactly what she had feared it would be: cold, transactional, suffocating. Her in-laws controlled every part of her life. She envied that I had escaped, but she couldn't. She wasn't brave enough. The message ended there. No request for advice. No question. Just words left hanging in the air. Loneliness crept in. No family. No brother. Even Aisha, the one person who understood, was trapped in her own cage. The thought of reaching out to my mother nagged at me, but I knew how that would go. She wouldn't admit to anything. She would say all could be forgiven if I just came home. Therapy helped me recognize it for what it was: manipulation, a cycle of control disguised as love. My parents didn't want me back because they missed me. They wanted me back on their terms. A friend snapped me back to reality. His words were blunt. If they loved you unconditionally, they wouldn't make you choose between your happiness and their approval. He was right, and the proof was in my progress. My job was thriving. A few months in, I had already earned a promotion. No family connections. No last name advantages. Just me proving to myself that I could succeed without them. Not everyone in the family agreed with how I had been treated. Quiet messages started coming in from distant relatives. Ones who couldn't openly support me, but wanted me to know they admired what I had done. They told me they wished they had my courage. But their lives were too entangled. They couldn't risk the same fate. And then my father reached out again. A short text, no acknowledgement of the past. Just a cold, detached message. I heard you're doing well. Congratulations. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't an attempt to fix anything. It was him testing the waters. Seeing if I was ready to fall back in line, I sent a single response. I'm open to talking, but only if you respect my choices. The reply came minutes later. You're either part of this family, or you're nothing. I blocked the number. For the first time, I didn't feel guilt. No second thoughts. No lingering doubt. Just relief. A week later, Aisha messaged again. This time she asked a question. Do you think I could ever leave? She already knew the answer, but she needed to hear it from someone who had done it. I told her the truth, and for the first time I started to believe it myself. I was finally free. The next wave of attacks came fast. Another post from my younger brother surfaced, this one even worse than the last. This time, he wasn't just talking about duty and selfishness. He was making it personal. Some people only care about their freedom, even if it means abandoning their own mother while she's sick. The comment section exploded. Relatives, old family friends, and even people I barely knew chimed in. They called me heartless, ungrateful, a disgrace. Some outright said they hoped I regretted my choices. Others speculated that I would come crawling back once I realized the world wasn't so kind without family. Then I got a private message from an aunt. Short, simple. Call your mother. So I did. She picked up, but the moment I said her name, she cut me off. You broke this family. Then the call ended. The silence after was heavier than any insult, any rumor, any social media post. After that, more people started pulling away. Old friends, ones I had grown up with, stopped answering messages. Some even unfollowed me. A few left vague responses like it's complicated, but the truth was clear. No one wanted to be associated with someone cast out by their own family. But I wasn't alone. At work, things were different. My colleagues didn't care about my last name, my family's reputation, or whether I had disrespected tradition. They only cared that I did my job well. Some of them knew parts of the story, but none of them treated me like I was broken. I started spending more time with them, grabbing lunch after work, joining weekend plans. Slowly, they became my support system. Then, one night, another message came in. Aisha, it was late. Her text was short, but it said everything. I don't know how to leave. I sent her a number, a women's support group, resources, everything I could think of. She didn't reply. Days passed, and I assumed she had given up. Then another message came through. I'm scared. I told her the truth. She wasn't alone. Then my father called. It wasn't his number. He had gotten a new one. If you don't fix this, don't bother coming back. Even for your mother's funeral. The last warning. The final cut. I didn't respond. I blocked the number. A few weeks later, another message from Aisha. This time it was different. I left. She had done it, packed her things, walked out, and didn't look back. But it hadn't been easy. Her parents tried to stop her, first with guilt, then with outright threats. She had to wait until they were out of the house, sneaking out with only a small bag. Even then, she spent the first few nights at a friend's house, terrified they would track her down, but she kept moving forward. She had found a place to stay, and she was figuring out the rest as she went. The last part of her message hit hardest. I wouldn't have had the courage if you hadn't left first. For the first time, I felt like all of this had meant something. I had lost my family, my home, and everything I had ever known. But in the process, I had helped someone else find their way out. Then the news traveled back home. A cousin reached out, telling me that my father was furious. He blamed me for Aisha leaving. Said I had poisoned her mind, ruined her life, taught her to be selfish. I didn't care. For the first time, I didn't feel the need to explain myself. I didn't need their approval. In therapy, I finally understood. I had spent my whole life trying to prove myself to my family, trying to be good enough, trying to make them see me as more than just an extension of their legacy. I didn't need that anymore, so I made a decision. I booked a flight, a one-way ticket. For the first time in my life, I wasn't running from something. I was finally moving forward. The message came out of nowhere. An email. Short. Direct. Your mother is sick. Come home. No greeting. No explanation. No acknowledgement of the past year. Just those 5 words. For a moment it lingered. The urge to respond, to check, to make sure she was okay. But I knew better. A cousin confirmed what I already suspected. My mother was sick, but it wasn't life-threatening. My father had exaggerated, twisting the truth to make it sound like an emergency. A last-ditch effort to pull me back in. I didn't fall for it. I stayed put. And then my brother struck again. Another post. This time, even more aggressive. Some people don't even care if their own mother is dying. They're too proud to admit they made a mistake. The comments rolled in fast. More relatives chiming in, more distant acquaintances taking sides. Some were angry, some were disappointed. A few even offered prayers for my lost soul. Then a private message from my brother. He didn't ask. He didn't explain. Just attacked. You are heartless. I hope you regret this when it's too late. I sent one response. I hope she recovers, but I won't be blackmailed into obedience. His reply was instant. Furious. You're dead to us. I didn't respond. I didn't block him. I just closed the app. At work, things were different. I had been so caught up in the drama that I almost forgot. I was doing well. Really well. The same week my brother cut me off for good. I got pulled into a meeting with senior management, recognition for my work, an award, a bonus, a career path that had nothing to do with my family's name or reputation. Then another message, but this time, not from my family, Aisha. A picture of her new apartment, a place she chose. No husband, no in-laws, just her own space. For the first time in my life, I wake up without fear. She didn't need to say anything else. And then came the real surprise. A distant aunt reached out. One I barely remembered from childhood. She had watched everything unfold from a distance. Unlike the others, she didn't judge me. She just wanted to reconnect. For the first time in months, a piece of my past didn't feel like a burden. Then, the final move. Another message from my father. This one longer. Less direct, but the meaning was clear. This is your last chance. Choose family or exile. I didn't reply. I didn't even open it again. I blocked the number. And just like that, the weight lifted. No more guilt, no more hesitation, no more what ifs. So I did the thing I had been waiting for all this time. I booked a trip, a one-way ticket. At the airport, I stood there, looking at my boarding pass. No regrets, no doubts, just freedom. And for the first time, it didn't feel like running away. It felt like starting over. The past never really stays buried. Months had passed since I blocked my father, since I walked away for good, since I boarded that plane, leaving behind everything I had ever known. And yet, there it was. An email from my mother. It was long. Too long. The first message from her in months. She didn't apologize. She didn't acknowledge what they had done, but she did say she missed me. Buried between lines of longing were the same words I had heard before, that she had been suffering, that she didn't understand why I had turned my back on my own family, that no matter what happened, she would always love me. Guilt, layered in love. I sat with it for a while. Then a cousin reached out, quietly warning me. My father dictated that email. It wasn't a mother's raw emotions. It was a carefully constructed message designed to reel me back in. A subtle trap, dressed as an olive branch. I didn't respond. Aisha messaged later that night, just catching up. She had seen a glimpse of my mother's post online, something about a mother's love enduring even when children are ungrateful. She didn't push. She didn't tell me what to do, but she did tell me one thing: don't let them rewrite the past just because they miss you now. The past wasn't done though. Another cousin, one I hadn't spoken to in over a year, sent me a single message. They're planning your brother's wedding. I already knew what that meant. My father was continuing the cycle. My brother had taken my place as the obedient son, the one who didn't fight back. And now he was next in line for an arranged marriage. No choice, no voice, just duty. I debated reaching out, but what was the point? He had already made his stance clear. I had stopped existing to him the day I refused to obey. Instead, I responded to my mother's email. Just one sentence. I love you, but I won't return to a life that suffocates me. The silence after was deafening. She didn't reply. Not the next day, not the next week, not the next month. And I didn't chase after an answer, because my life kept moving. I was promoted at work. A leadership position. No family connections, no influence. Just me, building something from the ground up. Aisha got her dream job. A new city. A fresh start. She sent me a message when she signed the contract. I didn't think I'd ever get here, but you showed me I could. Then out of nowhere, my distant aunt, the only one who ever supported me, visited. She had followed my journey from a distance. She told me, in quiet words, that she was proud of me, that I had done what so many before me wished they could do, but never had the courage to. I asked her about my brother. She hesitated, then finally admitted he wasn't taking it well. Rumors had already started spreading, that he was resisting the marriage, that he wasn't as willing as our father had hoped. I didn't intervene. I had learned my lesson. Some battles have to be fought alone. Then the last desperate attempt, a letter from my father. I didn't even open it. I didn't need to. I already knew what it would say: guilt, duty, family, tradition. It didn't matter anymore. For the first time, I didn't feel anger, or guilt, or sadness, just relief, because for the first time in my life, I was truly free. 1 year, 12 months without a single call, message, or forced family intervention. For the first time, no one was trying to pull me back in. The silence wasn't cold, it was peaceful. No regrets, no lingering doubt, just life moving forward. Aisha's name popped up on my phone one evening, a picture message, a diamond ring. She was engaged, not to someone her family picked, not to a stranger they forced on her, but to someone she chose. Breaking free had been worth it. Then came the unexpected news. A cousin, one of the few who still spoke to me, mentioned my younger brother's wedding had collapsed. Not after the wedding, before it even happened. Invitations had already gone out. The venue was booked. The families were gathered. Then at the last moment something snapped. My brother refused. No one knew why. No one could explain what made him say no. After months of silence, after standing by our father's side while I was cut out. But it didn't matter. The damage was done. The fallout was immediate. Guests left in shock. The bride's family was humiliated. My father, once the iron-willed leader of the family, was publicly challenged. And for the first time, people weren't whispering about me. They were questioning him. His grip was slipping. His influence wasn't absolute anymore. Then the next shift, a job offer. Not just any job. A major company headhunting me. No family name, no traditional connections, just my own work getting recognized. I accepted, and for the first time, I allowed myself to build something beyond survival. New city, new workplace, new people, and then new love. Someone who saw me as me. No expectations, no obligations, no demands to change who I was. For the first time, I wasn't making choices out of fear. I was choosing for myself. Then the wedding, not my family's, not another forced union. My best friend's wedding, a celebration of real love. A relationship built on choice, not obligation. I watched from the crowd, realizing how different it all was from the life I had left behind. And then, during the reception, a familiar face appeared. a cousin, one who had once stood against me. He hesitated before speaking, but when he did, the words were simple. You were right to leave. Then another unexpected revelation. My mother still kept tabs on me. She never admitted it, never reached out, but through whispers, through family conversations, through little questions she asked others, I knew she had never truly let go. She wouldn't say she was wrong, but she knew she had lost me. The final piece fell into place a week later. A text. My younger brother. 4 words. I get it now. That was it. No explanation, no apology, no request to talk, just a moment of honesty. I didn't know if it meant reconciliation. I didn't know if he was ready to leave, but I left the door open. And in therapy, I realized something else. You don't need closure from them, my therapist told me. You gave yourself closure, and they were right. Because my life wasn't about what I had lost. It was about what I had built. On my birthday, I sat surrounded by friends, chosen family, people who saw me as I was, not as something to control. No guilt, no shame, just happiness. And for the first time in my life, I truly felt free. The final twist came when I least expected it. A distant relative reached out, casually dropping the news. My younger brother's arranged marriage had collapsed within months. After all the pressure, all the expectations, all the effort to replace me as the perfect son, he had walked away. Or maybe she had. The details were unclear, but the outcome was the same. A public failure, an embarrassment to the family. And suddenly, for the first time in his life, my brother was the disappointment. The fallout was immediate. My father's carefully maintained reputation took another massive hit, with me gone and my brother's marriage destroyed. His image as the respected patriarch of the family crumbled. Relatives who once supported him started whispering. His grip over the family weakened, and like always, he refused to take responsibility. Instead, he blamed me. According to him, I had poisoned my brother's mind. I had inspired rebellion. It was my fault that his sons had failed him. I hadn't spoken to my brother in over a year. I had nothing to do with his marriage, but in my father's eyes, my refusal to obey had set off a chain reaction, and now he was paying the price. Then out of nowhere, Aisha showed up at my door. It had been months since we last spoke. She looked different, lighter, happier. She didn't stay long. She just wanted to say thank you. Not over text, not through a quick message. She wanted to look me in the eye and tell me that leaving had been the best decision of her life, that she had found real happiness, that she had finally learned how to live for herself. And then, just like that, she was gone. Truly free. Days later, my brother messaged again. This time, it wasn't just a vague, I get it now. This time, it was longer. I made a mistake. I should have listened to you. Then, another message. I need your help. I stared at the words for a long time. After everything, was I supposed to just let him back in? He had stood by when our father cut me out. He had mocked me online, called me selfish, refused to listen when I warned him. Now he wanted help. Before I could respond, more news trickled in. My father wasn't done. He was already trying to arrange another marriage for my brother, ignoring his feelings, ignoring his failure, ignoring everything that had already happened. It was happening again, and this time, my brother was desperate. I'm ready to leave, he finally said. I just don't know how. I didn't sugarcoat my response. If you want out, you have to do it yourself. No rescuing, no hand-holding. I had done it alone. If he was serious, he had to make the choice himself. Then silence. Weeks passed. I started to assume he had caved, that he had let himself be pulled back in, just like I had seen happen to so many others before. Then, a knock at my door. He stood there, duffel bag slung over his shoulder. I left, but not before weeks of fighting. He told me about the threats, the screaming, the moments he almost caved. But in the end, he realized he would never be free unless he walked away. It wasn't a grand reunion, no emotional breakdown, no dramatic apology, just quiet understanding. For the first time in years, we sat down as equals. And then, finally, the words I never thought I'd hear. I'm sorry, not just for what he had said, not just for the way he had treated me, for not believing me when I told him how broken our family truly was. Meanwhile, back home, our father's response was exactly what I expected. You are no longer my son. The same words he once said to me. But this time, I didn't hear them alone. For the first time, my brother and I stood together. The two sons who refused to be controlled. The two disappointments. The two free men. We never looked back.